Hey guys, so the last time we met, we talked about the different patterns of minority group treatment. There's absolutely no particular physical or cultural background that is naturally superior or inferior by nature. However, the existence of dominant and minority groups does lead to two separate but related phenomenon known as discrimination and prejudice. So let's take a look at these two things because while related, they are definitely not the same thing. So prejudice is a deeply held negative attitude toward a group and its individual members. It inclines you against people in other groups. It's directed against all members of that group and is a biased opinion. The thing with prejudice is that it is an attitude. There is no way that we can look at someone and know whether or not they are prejudiced because there is no way that we can look at someone and know what exactly it is that they are thinking or feeling at that moment. On the other hand, discrimination is actually unfair treatment of a minority group by the dominant group. It's acting upon those opinions that people have when they are prejudiced. So while prejudice is an attitude, discrimination is a behavior. We can definitely identify discriminatory behavior when it happens. So let's look at these two things a little bit more in depth. With prejudice has negative consequences for all of society. It's usually based on strong emotions and is very difficult to change even in the face of overwhelming evidence. The reason for that is that perception is reality. We oftentimes see what we want to see and believe what we want to be true, not necessarily what actually is true. It serves as justification for discrimination. So if I want to believe that everyone who wears glasses is smart and a nerd, then I will only concentrate on behaviors for those individuals that wear glasses that solidify my belief that they're smart and nerdy. For the record, I do not believe that everyone who wears glasses is smart and nerdy. So anyway, when we think less of individuals, it makes it easier for us to justify treating them poorly. Two extreme forms of prejudice are, of course, racism, which is the belief that one's own race or ethnic group is naturally superior to others, and sexism, which is the belief that one gender is naturally superior to another. Discrimination occurs at both the individual and societal level. So I as a person can discriminate and society at large can discriminate as well. It ranges from name-calling and rudeness to acts of violence, physical harm, and even death. While individual discrimination is definitely a problem, in this class we're looking more at things at the societal level. So there's two types of societal discrimination. The first type of societal discrimination is legal discrimination. That's discrimination that's upheld by the law. For example, in the United States after the Civil War, we had the Jim Crow laws, which said flat out that black people and white people were not allowed to share the same spaces, go to the same schools, drink at the same water fountains, etc. That's legal discrimination. We've also had gender discrimination here in the United States when we said things like women weren't allowed to vote, women weren't allowed to own property, women weren't allowed to seek divorce, women weren't allowed to have bank accounts. So how do you change legal discrimination? You change it by simply changing the law. Again, though, simply changing the law and making that discriminatory behavior no longer legal is not necessarily going to change the way that people actually think. The other type of societal discrimination is institutional discrimination. These are unfair practices that grow out of the way that we structure society, and so oftentimes it's not even necessarily recognized or realized that the things that we do lead to discriminatory behavior. Unequal access to resources and rewards leads to those individuals having less powerful positions in society. Those individuals having less powerful positions in society then creates a position where they once again have unequal access to resources and rewards. Discrimination is not open or conscious. In other words, people aren't saying, oh, this group is not necessarily allowed to have access to this information or these resources, but by default, that's what ends up happening. We've talked about this numerous times in class already when we talk about how public schools are set up. Low-income communities are poorly funded because they don't get as much in property taxes. Therefore, those individuals don't acquire the same degree of education as those who are in higher income schools, which means that they then have lower paying jobs and then, once again, live in low-income communities, which is where their children will go to poorly funded schools. So it's very much self-perpetuating. We can see this with what we're experiencing right now. TJ has access to, we're a one-to-one district. Everyone has access to computers given to them by the schools. Some of our neighboring school districts don't have that. So the level of education that you're receiving during this unprecedented circumstance is going to be vastly different than the education that others are receiving, even though they may only live 5 or 10 miles away. Whether or not you are prejudiced and discriminate can land you in one of 4 different categories. If you are prejudiced and you discriminate, you are an active bigot. This is someone who is prejudiced and openly discriminates. Examples of this would be like members of the KKK, members of neo-Nazi groups, members of any type of hate group. An individual who is prejudiced but does not discriminate because of societal pressures is a timid bigot. They may not discriminate because they are afraid that they are going to get in trouble. So, for example, a manager who continues to hire women, even though he feels that women are inferior whenever it comes to the work that they produce, but does so because he's afraid that he'll be called on the carpet and sued for discrimination, would be a timid bigot. If you are not prejudiced, but you discriminate, you are a fair weather liberal. This is sort of like the opposite of the timid bigot. It's someone who discriminates because they feel societal pressure to do so. So the question always arises, like, why would someone discriminate if they don't actually feel that others are unequal to them? The best example I can give you of this is if I were to take you on a field trip to a KKK rally, even though you don't believe that Catholics, Jews, Black people, Hispanics, women, or any of the other slew of individuals the KKK happens to be against are unequal to a white Protestant man, you would probably be unlikely to say, oh, hey, wait a second, Mr. Grand Wizard, I actually believe you're wrong here, because you would feel as though your life could potentially be in danger. Finally, if you are not prejudiced and you do not discriminate, you are an all-weather liberal. This one's pretty self-explanatory. Next time, we'll take a look at sources of discrimination and prejudice, and your assignment for this lesson will be posted on Google Classroom. I hope you guys are all doing great. I miss you.